Okay, then let's start. And sorry for the delay. We had some technical difficulties, but I think now we're good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Incomindios EMRIP side event. Bienvenidos a todas y todos. My name is Barbara Stuart. Since 2018, I'm an Incomindios board member, and I will give a brief introduction to this event. First, I would like to mention that this event has simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish, as well as from Spanish to English. Two of our speakers will be speaking in Spanish, so you can switch the audio channel over the little globe button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. For now, the main channel will be in English. Y ahora en español, ese evento cuenta con interpretación simultánea del inglés al español y también del español al inglés. Dos de nuestros panelistas hablarán en español y si quieres cambiar el idioma, puedes cambiar el canal de audio en el pie de tu pantalla Zoom. Por ahora, el canal principal estará en inglés. On that note, I also want to welcome our two interpreters, Carolina and Olivia, and thank you very much for supporting this event. Also, I want to note that we are recording and we will share this recording on our YouTube and other social media channels over the next days. So again, welcome to all of you. A first special welcome to our speakers and all our Indigenous listeners. Secondly, we have invited representatives of the government of India, Colombia, and Guatemala to participate. So a very warm welcome if they are here. And thirdly, of course, welcome to all other listeners as well. Thank you so much for joining. We can go to the next slide. I would now like to give a brief introduction to the organization Incomindios. Incomindios is originally a Swiss human rights organization. We advocate for indigenous rights with a focus on North and Latin America. Incomindios was founded in 1974 on the initiative of indigenous delegates to the UN, and supporting indigenous delegates and their missions at the UN is still a core area of the organization. Since 2003, we also have the consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. And this directly allows the delegates we support and us as an organization to participate at relevant UN events, such as the EMRIP, for instance. Since 2019, Incomindios also has a UK chapter with which we can more easily reach the English-speaking public. Besides the collaboration with Indigenous delegates at the UN, we also support local Indigenous projects which aim at protecting Indigenous culture and the environment. And finally, we also work to inform the Swiss and the British public about Indigenous issues, human rights violations, and generally, we work to build bridges between Indigenous movements and European civil society. So we are very excited to host this side event tonight, especially because we have three amazing speakers. For now, it's only two. We hope that Andrea from Guatemala will connect in the next minutes. But first, I want to introduce Atina Pamey. She's a Naga from Northeast India. Atina has been a human rights activist for more than 15 years, advocating on the human rights of Indigenous peoples, women, and children. She has worked with the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the International Labour Organization, and the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, a regional Indigenous peoples rights mechanism in Asia. She's a member of the Naga Women Union, as well as the Global Naga Forum, and is currently based in Norway, from where she is remotely working on the defense and promotion of the human rights of Naga people in particular, but indigenous peoples of India in general. Atina will speak in English, so when she's speaking and you need Spanish translation, you can just switch the audio channel as I explained before. Our second speaker, Aldemar Bolaños Caldón, is a member of the Coconuco people from the Puracé Reserve in Colombia. He's a lawyer in the CRIC's Defense of Life and Human Rights program. The CRIC is the Regional Indigenous Council of the Cauca, a region in Colombia. As a coordinator, Aldemar is in charge of the team representing victims in the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. He's also a youth coordinator of the Coconuco people, which consists of 9 indigenous authorities in the 3 municipalities in the Cauca department. Aldemar is a co-founder of the Coconuco Indigenous Jurisdiction Research Center, which has the aim of showing the academic world how to research indigenous issues from the perspective of indigenous thought. And Aldemar was one of our youth scholars in the year 2020, so I'm really happy that he's also speaking on this side event. He will speak in Spanish. You can change for English translation. We will see if our third speaker, Andrea Ixchiu, will connect later. I think I'll just introduce her later if she connects. So we will hear those contributions shortly, and after each contribution, there will be a space for the speakers to respond to each other as well as for questions from the audience. So feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute you so you can post your question or comment, or you can also just write in the chat. After all presentations, there will be another opportunity to ask questions. And now I would like to pass the mic to our moderator for tonight. Helena Newberg is Incomindios member since 1980, and she is still very active within the organization, sharing her knowledge and experience with us younger members. So this is always a great support, and thank you, Helena. You have the floor.
Thank you, Barbara. I will speak in English, and I thank the interpreters Olivia and Carolina for their precious job. Allow me to give you an insight into today's issue. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Indigenous peoples have had limited opportunities to advocate for their rights at United Nations. It has become clear that there is still a global digital gap within Indigenous communities, and this despite the fact that several UN-based documents have explicitly mentioned the right of Indigenous peoples to digital technology. I think in particular, the Declaration of Principles of the World Summit of Information Society says in Article 15 that particular attention must be given to the special situation of Indigenous peoples, as well as to the preservation of their heritage and their cultural legacy. And Articles 12 to 17 clearly state the responsibility of governments to implement measures beneficial to Indigenous peoples. And of course, we have UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Here in Article 39, it's explicitly stated that Indigenous peoples have the right to access to financial and technical assistance from states and through international cooperation. Finally, the upcoming International Decade of Action for Indigenous Languages, here digital tools must be accessible to Indigenous peoples to implement any meaningful measures in an equal way. So Incomindios wanted to offer support for bridging the digital gap. This is how this side event came about. We have invited 3 Indigenous speakers, as you heard, to report on the situation of the digital gap in their countries and communities. We have hoped that the missions of the three countries could participate to see how they could cooperate with indigenous communities directly to provide appropriate infrastructure and support. Maybe we will get a response later when we post our side event. This takes me to invite our first speaker to share. I am very happy to ask Atina Pamey, our Naga representative from India. You have the floor. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to say thank you to the organizers, Incomindios, and also my special thanks to Barbara for the warm introduction and to Helena for introducing me. I would like to speak today about the digital inequality that exists within the indigenous peoples communities in India, with special reference to my community where I come from, Tamenglong, in the state of Manipur in the northeast India. So I'll be taking some references from that context. But before I go into the discussion on the digital gap in the communities, I want to also briefly talk a little bit about the status of indigenous peoples in India. As we know, India voted for the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007, with a reservation that all Indians since the independence are indigenous people. Nevertheless, there has been some significant developments in terms of how Indian government refer to the indigenous peoples in India. Just to also say that indigenous peoples in India are the tribals or the scheduled tribes. They're considered to be the indigenous people of India. But as I said, government of India has started to use the term indigenous population in some of the very important official documents, including in one of the acts. For instance, the legal recognition in the mention of indigenous population in the recently bills, in the citizenship amendment bills that was passed in the lower house of parliament. It used the term indigenous population to refer to the tribals, which in itself shows that government of India is, sort of recognizing or the status or the identity of indigenous people in India. And also in another instance, in one of the notification issued in 2018 by the Ministry of Home Affairs, it created a high-level committee to look into the social, economic, cultural, and linguistic issues of indigenous population in the state of Tripura. So here also they use the term indigenous population. And in another case, we have from the state of Jharkhand. Jharkhand is a tribal populated state, and the chief minister declared the 9th of August, the world's Indigenous Peoples Day, as the state holiday for Jharkhand. So these are all some progressive landmarks in terms of how Indian government are acknowledging or recognizing officially by using the terms indigenous population, although there was a reservation to begin with when the EMRIP was adopted, which India was one of the signatories. Now, let me go into the topics of what we are supposed to speak today. I was one of the person who was given the questionnaires by Incomindios to talk about the digital gaps existing in the indigenous communities. So I was able to also interact with people back home on the gaps, and I myself go home from time to time and also know the situation quite well. As you can see, that indigenous peoples have low infrastructure in terms of not only the digital connection, but also in terms of road communications, electricity, and all this is a big gaps. So you can see that internet connection is the least priority in that sense. But one thing I want to mention here, which is a very important factor, is the digitalization of India, the initiative taken by the government of India to digitalize the whole of India. So under the initiative of the government, Digital India initiative was launched in 2016 by the Honorable Prime Minister, and since then there has been a really drive to penetrate internet connections in all parts of the country. However, the gap still remains because, as I said, there are other factors, infrastructures issues that is hindering the connectivity. So the internet and broadband connectivity is still a far cry for most of the indigenous peoples in India, and in particular in the hill district of Manipur, Tamenglong, and other districts, they are still facing this as a huge issue. According to the statistics provided, there are out of the 1.3 billion people, the total population of India, 45% of the population have access to internet use. This is a report done by one of the data analysis from an international organization, and it says that 45% of the total population in India have access to internet. But again, this is largely dominated by mobile internet users, and there is a big gap in the overall scenario of the country. In India, also there is the urban internet users and rural internet users have a big gap again in that sense. So some data I want to mention here is, for example, there as of 2021 January, there are 448.1 million social media users in India. This is a huge number, but again, as I said, these are mostly concentrated in the urban areas. And for indigenous peoples, they are mostly in the remote and rural areas. So this does not really account, or this does not really affect the population of indigenous peoples. So which means that we are still very much lacking behind in terms of internet and broadband connectivity. And one of the facts here is 64.8% of the people live in rural areas, which means that only very few people are accessing the internet connection. And according to the National Statistical Organization report, which is a government agency that was taken from 2017-2018 survey, Internet users in the urban areas amount to, as I said, 42 to 45%, but in the rural, it is only 15%. So in effect, it means only 1 out of 10 households have computers, laptops, and smartphones in the remote and rural areas. So you can see the disparity that exists, even though India is claiming to be moving forward with the digitalization of the countries. And now with the COVID, there has been a really grave consequences on the learning for children, students in the education sector. It is the worst affected because of the lockdowns, many schools and colleges shut down, and then government introduced a learning portal, and that is supposed to reach out to all the millions of students in India, both in the rural and also in the urban. But the problem again with the rural population, which indigenous people are among the rural population, is that they have no infrastructure, they have no computer, or they have no laptop, or they don't even have smartphone. For instance, there was an interview in one of the news coverage that a young girl was explaining, a college student explaining to the journalist, saying that they have only one smartphone in the family, and she has to share it among the other siblings, so 3 of them. And it was very hard for them to have that, access to the learning portal, even though it was provided by the authorities, by the education department. So these are all the problems. And one more thing I want to also mention with regards to the digital gap in our community is that besides the infrastructures, the problem of electricity, there is also an issue of illiteracy. For example, language is also an issue because most of the applications are in English. And then people have no access to their mother tongue language in terms of, using the internet. So that is also another issue. And as we know that the International Decade for the Indigenous World's Indigenous Language is coming up, and we hope that this would also be something that the decade will address. And the other factors that I also want to mention is, as I said, digital literacy is an issue, but besides that, there is also a gender disparity in access. For example, the patriarchal social norms is also affecting in terms of indigenous people having, the ownership or the access to gadgets. For example, men would always be the one to have the, there would always be the preference to have access to the digital gadgets, whereas women, for example, a mother, would be the last one to use, or they would even care less. They would think that, okay, man, that is a man's thing. So that kind of gender disparity in terms of access to gadgets, in terms of access to internet, is also very much prevalent. And then as I mentioned briefly, the COVID vaccine that the national government has now introduced, has launched a mass vaccination program, has been launched, but it is also again done through the registration has to be done through the internet. For example, they have the app GoWin, wherein people have to register and get their names along with their identity, like we use Aadhaar card. So all these complications is so far reach for the indigenous peoples in the remote areas. First is they don't have the internet access, and second is they don't have the infrastructure like laptops, smartphones, and then again all these complications. So these are all really putting the people, a big burden, and there is a huge inequality. So in spite of the best effort of the government to digitalize, there is still a big gap. And how do you address this is a big concern. I think I have used the given time, so I think I will end here, and if there's anything, I will pitch in again later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Atina, for this very, very comprehensive insight into the situation of indigenous peoples in general, actually also for the whole population in India. And of course, it's not easy for a government to kind of get a grasp to the problem with I think you are, what did you say, 800 million people or even more nowadays. And of course, the indigenous peoples, as in very many cases, are the ones that lack considerable attention. That's clear. And it's also very interesting to see that it is also a gender disparity, so that has to be borne in mind. I'm not sure whether Aldemar would like to directly respond to Atina. Maybe he could make a sign or just unmute himself or show himself, or shall we see whether there are questions or responses in the chat? I'm just giving Barbara a moment to see what's going on. Is Aldemar ready to respond? Does he see any differences or very similarities before he starts with his own presentation? Otherwise, we can also go on. I think that is rather the case. And may I add that I actually was able today to contact the permanent mission to India in Geneva, to the United Nations, and they actually apologized for not being able to participate. They underlined that the Digital India initiative that has been launched already 2015, 2016 is one of their flagship programs. That's what the permanent mission told me. And it reaches out to all the people, including indigenous peoples and marginalized sections of the society. And the mission conveys the best wishes to our side event. And I think it is going to be very important to them to hear what Atina said, because I think her situation or her explanation of the situation is really valid and has to be taken into account by the government, and they sure have to strengthen their efforts to undo this bad situation for indigenous peoples. So, Barbara.
So we have two questions, actually. I will just read them out to you, Atina. The first one is, you mentioned how the use of internet and digital media might encourage the use of other wider spoken languages. However, do you also see a benefit in bridging the digital gap when it comes to retaining or revitalizing indigenous languages? You are muted still.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Yes, I definitely see that that could be one of the contributing factors to bridge the digital gap, because many indigenous peoples, especially in the rural areas, they have they don't speak Hindi, which is the national language, or they don't speak the state language. For example, in Manipur, the state language is Manipuri, and then English, the second official language in India. So for the elderly and those who are in the village, without the knowledge or the communicate what do you call comprehensible means of communication, they would not be able to properly effectively used. So to have the language available in, in a language that is understandable for the indigenous communities would be a very big asset in terms of bridging the gap. I definitely feel so. Right now, for example, we have local newspaper in Tamenglong in our mother tongue, Rongmei Naga, that is one of the tribes of Nagas. So that everybody have access to the newspaper, so they are updated. That is the only means of communication and getting information about the outside world and also what's happening in the community. Even the radio program that we have, that is run by the Air India radio, for our language, we have like 30 minutes only, just to give us brief news and then some presentation. So it is not enough. So we are marginalized in terms of not only internet access, but in terms of information, communication, and now with this ICT, information communication technology, which internet and broadband penetration would help. But this is something that that is really, I would say that this is a right violation on for the indigenous peoples living in the rural areas. Thank you.
Yes, just before Barbara sets with the second question, you are very right, Atina. We talk about right to the indigenous peoples, which has been enshrined in several documents, as I iterated earlier.
Yes.
So actually we can claim your right, and I hope that the Indian government will take this up. Barbara?
Yes, thank you. So the second question would be, how could digitalization help to empower Indigenous women? You talked about the gender gap. So
yes. This is one of my passionate topic. So yes, I think a lot of indigenous women, especially in the, at least in the town center where there is internet access, at least using the smartphone, they are able to connect to the world, and also now in India, the WhatsApp social communication network is very popular, besides of course Facebook and other. So we have the different groups like community groups, women's groups, youth groups, and that's where they interact and they share information. And that is the medium of engagement in terms of using the information technology. For women, I feel that I myself have seen that women are becoming more empowered. This is indigenous women living in the town center, so where they have a better access. But again, this is also still limited, even though they have access when there is electricity, the power cut, which often happens, and for weeks they wouldn't have, because the power, they have some issues with the cable, or there is not enough, I don't know, for so many reasons. So this is always a problem. As you know, that broadband also works together with electricity. So once there is power cut, then there is disruption. So there is erratic internet connection. But again, going back to the empowerment of women and how digital connections would empower them, I definitely see that this is where you can also voice out your issues and concerns as an individual, as a group, and then you become even more bold and courageous, hearing the stories of others. So there is a lot of exchanges in terms of your issues, or in terms of how someone is, for example, just to give you a simple example, someone is doing a gardening, for example, kitchen garden, and they're growing some vegetables, and then this has been shared in the social media, Facebook or WhatsApp, and then they pick up. So this is a kind of encouragement in terms of bringing positive positiveness, in how in your skill in doing not only about, you know, we don't talk only about like issues and that concerns us, but we also, I mean, women are starting to engage and copy and imitate and replicate the best practices, from simple things to a big thing, and it gives them voice and it gives them power, and they know that they are not alone, you know. So if they have an issue, also they share, and then there is a group that really sympathize or support them, and you know, that kind of community support is being extended. So I think this is something that is really empowering, especially for women.
Very good. That's wonderful to hear how internet or social media can also have a very positive effect, especially on the empowerment of women. Barbara, should we continue, or are there any questions in the chat anymore?
I think we can move on.
Okay, wonderful. Now I would like to invite Aldemar Bolaños Caldon to present his statement, please. And also I would like to ask Atina then to comment or to exchange with Aldemar once he has finished his statement. Hello, Aldemar. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Muy buena tarde a todos, a mis hermanos indígenas que nos acompañan en este espacio, a los compañeros de Incomindios, agradecer por la oportunidad de compartir un poco esta visión que tenemos nosotros desde los procesos indígenas, como pueblos indígenas también en Colombia. Quisiera abordar el tema puntual en 3 escenarios como para que comprendamos un poco eh, cómo se está viendo la brecha digital en Colombia y específicamente en el proceso que adelantamos con el CRIC. Entonces, en un primer escenario sería un análisis en relación con los otros derechos humanos como tal, entendido pues que para la garantía de este acceso a los medios digitales y a la tecnología de alguna manera pues que permiten el acceso a esta comunicación en digital pues requiere otros escenarios pues de garantía. Entonces pues se habla de los derechos de primera, segunda y tercera generación pues para poder hablar de este acceso. Entonces creo que en Colombia desde ya hace mucho tiempo se viene hablando de una desigualdad social en el sentido de que pues no hay las mismas oportunidades para toda la población y en especial pues podemos hablar de los pueblos indígenas en Colombia que pues han sufrido un escenario de discriminación, de abandono estatal como tal, de las instituciones del Estado y pues que esto ha generado pues que se presente una brecha social muy grande que ha generado pues cierto tipo de situaciones de orden político y económico también. También pues puedo hablar en el sentido de que pues, no solamente los pueblos indígenas se encontraban en ese escenario de exclusión social pues de esa falta de oportunidades, sino pues que la población campesina en su momento tomó la decisión, un sector pues de formar un grupo armado para poder, varios grupos armados en Colombia que pues generó un conflicto armado interno que pues hasta hoy se mantiene y que de alguna manera pues no ha permitido que se genere ese acercamiento entre la institucionalidad del Estado, pero también un escenario de exclusión política también frente a estas expresiones. Sin embargo, pues se ha ido avanzando en algunos puntos. Quisiera dejarlo, digamos, aquí como en el primer escenario para que, pues, de alguna manera comprendamos la situación en Colombia. El segundo punto, pues, que es importante mencionar en este tema es el tema de la educación. Creo que en el primer punto hablé de la falta de oportunidades, pero aquí lo puntualizamos frente a la formación y el desarrollo de los conocimientos propios, el acceso también a educación. Creo que para los pueblos indígenas formarse profesionalmente o acceder a la educación básica es aún un privilegio. Y esto pues en estos temas de acceso a los medios también para poder comunicarnos como lo estamos haciendo hoy, como lo estoy haciendo yo aquí, pues para algunos compañeros en algunos territorios indígenas aún sigue siendo un sueño. Entonces, creo que este tema pues relacionado con el tema de la educación también de alguna forma es un poco preocupante porque pues la misma institucionalidad con su precariedad está fomentando pues que este acceso a información pues de alguna manera no sea orientada para el fortalecimiento de las estructuras propias de gobierno, digamos para el tema de fortalecer ese reconocimiento de autonomía, pues también por parte de los jóvenes y de los niños pues que actualmente se están formando, pero que de alguna manera está facilitando pues acceso de otros medios también a incidir y de alguna manera pues homogenizar ese conocimiento pues que tenemos nosotros como pueblos indígenas. Entonces es un escenario pues que quisiera dejar como en, en discusión y pues aprovechando pues la invitación que se hizo al delegado de Colombia en la ONU pues para que pues creo que es conocedor de esta situación, pero pues yo lo planteo de esa manera. Y el tercer punto sería frente a la garantía de otros derechos. En ese orden de ideas, voy a hacer un relato un poco concreto frente al tema del COVID. El COVID en Colombia pues nos obligó a generar unas estrategias de comunicación pues que se hicieran, digamos, prelación al uso de los medios tecnológicos como pues lo que estamos haciendo hoy aquí. Pero ahí pues creo que evaluamos un poco lo que yo les estaba comentando en los dos primeros escenarios. Primero pues la garantía de los derechos humanos de primera, segunda y tercera generación y de alguna forma el nivel de formación que tenían nuestros compañeros para acceder a estos medios y que se hiciera de una forma adecuada sin que de alguna manera pues se pudiera afectar a este tema cultural. Aquí puedo decir también que en Colombia hay algunos pueblos indígenas que han tomado autónomamente la decisión de no ser contactados. Y pues esto se presenta más en la Amazonía colombiana y en los pueblos, unas comunidades indígenas pues que se encuentran en situación de aislamiento, pues y eso también es una decisión que en su momento también tienen los pueblos indígenas de decidir no acceder o no hacer uso de estos medios con el fin de proteger su identidad, su cultura y su cosmovisión. Entonces, quisiera pues plantearlo en esa manera, volver al tema de la garantía de otros derechos. Puntualmente hablo de una experiencia que se dio con el trabajo que estoy realizando. El equipo pues, que yo integro y del cual pues está a cargo de la coordinación técnica representa a más o menos 230.000 víctimas del conflicto armado en uno de los casos pues, más ambiciosos que tiene la jurisdicción de paz, que es el caso 5. Cuando apareció el COVID, pues ya había una programación de diligencias judiciales que pues tomó otro camino en el cual nosotros pudimos apoyar de alguna forma y creo que se dio un escenario bastante práctico en el cual pues nos deja una grata experiencia y quisiera pues cerrar aprovechando la limitación del tiempo con una propuesta pues que lo voy a plantear con la experiencia pues que les voy a contar. La jurisdicción de paz planteaba realizar un diagnóstico de acceso, o sea, de qué infraestructura tenían las víctimas pertenecientes a los territorios indígenas, pues priorizadas en los casos en el caso donde yo ejerzo la representación judicial. Nosotros les dijimos, nosotros ya lo sabemos porque tenemos un proceso interno en el marco de las estructuras del gobierno propio indígena, en la cual pues nosotros internamente pues hicimos la discusión y presentamos una propuesta y esa propuesta pues fue sometida a un diálogo entre autoridad judicial como es la JEP y las autoridades judiciales indígenas que están participando en este caso y se construyó un ejercicio pues que actualmente está funcionando y que creo que es uno de los referentes más significativos a nivel de Colombia, que esperamos que se pudiera repetir en otras, con otras instituciones del Estado, pero pues que ha sido muy difícil. Y es que se establecieron unas salas virtuales definidas por las autoridades indígenas, con unos protocolos establecidos por las mismas autoridades, bajo el control logístico como tal, o sea, la conexión y equipos fueron dispuestos por las autoridades y de alguna manera, pues, este ejercicio viene funcionando desde el año pasado. Vamos a completar un año haciendo ese trabajo y pues nos ha dejado una muy buena experiencia frente a cómo poder reducir esta brecha que hay de acceso, uno primero a los derechos de primera, segunda y tercera generación, pero también al acceso a los medios para poder tener este tipo de comunicación, así como lo estoy haciendo hoy aquí con ustedes. Entonces, la gran enseñanza que yo les puedo dejar aquí y esperamos que se siga materializando. Actualmente en Colombia hay unos escenarios de diálogo con los pueblos indígenas entre el gobierno y el gobierno propio de los pueblos indígenas y el gobierno nacional, cual pues está en la mesa permanente de concertación y para el Cauca en unos puntos específicos el decreto 1811, eh, que genera pues ese espacio en el cual pues se dialoga, se concerta, se implementa y se evalúan las diversas políticas pues que se tienen en estos temas. Y en cuanto al tema de la brecha, pues creo que hemos cerrado un poquito porque de alguna manera garantizamos la participación de las víctimas para obtener justicia en la jurisdicción de paz a través de estos medios. Y creo que es importante valorar ese esfuerzo que está haciendo la jurisdicción de paz y creo que es un aprendizaje para el gobierno colombiano, para el Estado colombiano, en el sentido de que hay que reconocer al otro como gobierno también, pero también hay que reconocer que hay unos escenarios internos que permiten y facilitan que estos medios puedan ser usados de una manera adecuada, sin correr el riesgo de que pues, pueda ser un elemento homogenizador de la cultura y que pues de alguna forma sirva para fortalecer lo que nosotros pues hemos ido construyendo a lo largo pues de nuestra existencia, partiendo pues de nuestra cosmovisión. Entonces pues quisiera cerrar puntualmente con este escenario. Agradecer pues por el espacio, pues no sé, creo que en las preguntas pudiera ampliar más algo de información, pues, pero eso sería pues puntualmente lo que les podría compartir.
Thank you very much, Aldemar. That was very valuable, what you told us. In particular, you sounded quite positive and forward-looking when it comes to your cooperation with your regional and national authorities. But I think you will have to use all your energy to improve the starting relationship with your government and make them accountable that they help you even more. What I would like to know now, immediately to what you told us, maybe you can also explain later, but just that you think of, it could be very interested in knowing whether what you told us also includes all of your indigenous communities, the elderly and the young people, those that are not that much into digital devices and internet, and those that are, you know, using these gadgets like the young people probably on an everyday space. But I would like to ask actually Atina first. Maybe you want to react to what you heard from Aldemar, or is there any concern or there's something that you would like to share with him?
Thank you very much for that presentation, Aldemar. And it was very good to listen to your situation. And there are similar situations that you have that is also relevant to us. But as Helena also pointed out, I also see that there is a very good cooperation that is already in place with the government authorities in terms of bridging the digital gap. That is something very, very positive and interesting to listen to. Like I mentioned in my presentation, we also have this, the flagship initiative of the government of India, the Digital India, to digitalize the whole of the country, and that initiative is ongoing, but there is still a big gap in our context. And for us, there is not too much space in terms of bringing our issues in the process of how to bridge the digital gap for indigenous peoples. The nation talks about this digital gap in general. So there is no disaggregated data of the indigenous peoples. So everything is very general discussion, rural, urban. So we have no specific discussion to our issues. So this is a contrast that I find in your situation and my situation. According to the World Summit on the Information Society, which Helena has highlighted in the very beginning, it was clearly stated that states are instructed to take particular attention to the special situation of indigenous peoples. I think that is something that the state should be doing, but in our case, I see that there is a gap. So that is one thing that I find it, interesting, that you have some program and cooperation already going on with your government. And I would like to ask you how did you, how effective is the engagement, and how do you foresee the bridging of this gap in terms of this cooperation? So if you can kindly explain that to me a little bit more, that'd be very nice. Thank you.
Aldemar, you heard Atina's question about the effectiveness of your engagement. Is it possible for you to respond? Thank you.
Listo. Creo que lo que yo les estoy comentando en este punto es el inicio de un trabajo que ya se había venido realizando desde hace ya muchos años y que no ha sido fácil. O sea, la construcción del espacio de diálogo no ha sido un escenario muy amable, como lo podemos decir. La pañoleta que ustedes ven aquí que estoy portando es de la organización del CRIC. En el mes de febrero de este año cumplió 50 años de trabajo, y en esos 50 años pues hubieron muchos mayores y líderes que inclusive entregaron su vida porque lo que hoy les estoy comentando pues fuera una realidad. Entonces la situación no fue fácil, pero no quiero, digamos, que se quede en el escenario de que todo o lo que yo mencioné pues es un escenario amigable, digamos, con el gobierno, porque como lo expresé, es solamente una institución del Estado, inclusive que se creó con el Acuerdo Final para la Paz, que está ahorita en implementación en Colombia, pues que se está logrando este acercamiento. En otros escenarios, por ejemplo, con el Ministerio de las Telecomunicaciones hay una situación bastante compleja, en especial con la comprensión territorial que tienen los pueblos indígenas, que es completa y pues no está separada pues como lo tiene el pensamiento occidental. Y en eso pues uno lo aterriza al tema del espectro electromagnético, que sirve para pues el tema de las emisoras, que en Colombia hay muchas, y de las cuales pues el gobierno cobra, el Estado colombiano pues cobra un impuesto, y para la lógica indígena, pues no debería ser así porque también hace parte del territorio y pues no podríamos estar haciendo ningún pago por algo que es nuestro. Entonces, hay unos escenarios en los cuales pueden haber discusiones muy fuertes, pues los espacios de diálogo se están dando, pero una cosa es dialogar y otra cosa es pues ya empezar a implementar de alguna forma este tipo de acuerdos. Lo otro que, pues, que nos genera un poco de preocupación es el tema de la educación. En algunos pueblos indígenas pues, se ha avanzado sobre los sistemas de educación propia que están a cargo de las autoridades, pues que tienen una responsabilidad puntual de la comunidad para hacer el acompañamiento, pero frente a la infraestructura, como lo mencioné en la exposición, hay una brecha muy grande en el tema social y económico. Entonces no hay un mismo escenario de oportunidades para todos aquí en Colombia, lo cual pues genera que el mismo ancho de la brecha social que está sea, digamos, proporcional al mismo ancho de la brecha digital que actualmente hay en Colombia. Entonces, quiero, digamos, que lo miremos de esa manera para que me comprendan un poco. La experiencia, pues, que yo les comenté es actual. Hemos hecho seguimientos a otros acuerdos, por ejemplo, inclusive en una reunión con el Ministerio de la tecnología y la información y de comunicaciones aquí en Colombia, se presentó una situación bastante discriminatoria frente a los pueblos indígenas, que creo que fue ampliamente conocida a nivel nacional e internacional, donde un funcionario trató de una manera despectiva a los compañeros que estaban en ese escenario de diálogo, pues diciendo que nosotros íbamos a ser brutos toda la vida y que pues así tuviéramos acceso a comunicaciones, pues esa situación no iba a cambiar. Entonces, creo que pues el camino está abierto, pero pues las discusiones pues se vienen desarrollando y pues no se están dando en el mejor escenario, excepto con la jurisdicción de paz, donde pues yo puedo contar de la experiencia que hemos tenido, lo que se ha desarrollado y pues de alguna manera genera una propuesta pues optimista hacia el futuro frente a reducir este escenario de la brecha digital.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aldemar. That was very enlightening. And it is shown clearly where there is no peace, no real negotiations at eye level and equal level is not possible. And certainly you showed that, like in Atina's case with the Naga in Northeast India, the difficulty is there that the government needs a specific will to implement your rights. Now, I would like to ask Barbara whether there has been any comments or questions directly to Aldemar.
Yes, we have one question. It's in Spanish, so I'll just say it in Spanish. ¿Hay esfuerzos independientes que no dependan del gobierno para mejorar la infraestructura de comunicación desde las mismas comunidades indígenas?
¿Podrías volver a repetirme? Creo que la escuché la mitad de la pregunta.
Ya, claro que sí. ¿Hay esfuerzos independientes que no dependen del gobierno para mejorar la infraestructura de comunicación desde las mismas comunidades indígenas?
Sí, hay esfuerzos en Colombia independientes de alguna manera, esencialmente establecer el acceso al fluido eléctrico, por ejemplo. El tema de energía solar o energías renovables, que pues trae consigo también el acceso a Internet y pues también los medios de poder hacer dinámica la comunicación a través de Internet. Y hay mucha cooperación internacional frente a este tema. Creo que hay unas experiencias bastante importantes en Colombia. creo, mi memoria no me falla, fue en el 2017, tuve la oportunidad de acompañar a los compañeros Jaguá en las selvas del Pacífico colombiano. Y ellos tenían instalado unos paneles solares en medio de la selva y tenían Wi-Fi. Y el Wi-Fi pues era de acceso a toda una comunidad pues que estaba muy apartada de de la civilización occidental. Estaba pues ya en su territorio. Inclusive pues tuvimos que caminar bastante para llegar a este lugar y compartir con los compañeros. Y de alguna manera pues eso está orientado más desde la educación. Creo que pues fue muy importante porque pues solamente pues se tenía que hacer el mantenimiento de todo el sistema de energía solar y pues el internet funcionaba de manera satelital y pues no generaba muchos costos pues que no pudieran ser sufragados pues, por el colectivo pues que estaba siendo beneficiado. De alguna manera pues me pareció una experiencia muy importante para este trabajo y fue de manera independiente. No sé actualmente si estaría funcionando, pero creo que se estaban fortaleciendo algunos espacios. En esa ocasión nos presentaron un diccionario que traducía algunas palabras de la lengua aguavit, que es lo que los hermanos aguá hablan en su idioma propio, al español. Y ellos pues estaban trabajando pues de cómo digitalizar todos estos escenarios también para comunicarnos por chat y demás. Y pues me pareció muy valiosa la experiencia. También aquí en la organización de la cual hago parte, el CRIC, tiene unos procesos independientes. Por ejemplo, hay una asociación de medios de comunicación que se llama la Red AMSIC, que agrupa a las emisoras comunitarias que actualmente pues ya empezaron a compartir contenido digital. Entonces ellas publican o tienen sus espacios digitales en internet donde pues programan sus contenidos como tal desde las emisoras y pues también presentan sus noticieros informando sobre lo que pasa en las comunidades y han sido unas herramientas muy importantes porque nos han servido inclusive como protección. Estas emisoras pues han alertado sobre situaciones pues muy graves que han ocurrido en los territorios. Como no hay acceso inclusive a señal de teléfono, sino pues funciona solamente el radio. Entonces han sido unos espacios de protección y de comunicación pues que han garantizado inclusive situaciones de protección y salvaguarda de derecho como a la vida. Entonces pues eso les podría compartir así que me llega ahorita a la memoria con la pregunta.
Okay, thank you. There's also a second question. So you talked about how you managed to give access to the peace process to victims of the armed conflict. Where would digitalization also be helpful in empowering Indigenous peoples and fight the social and political exclusion you talked about in Colombia?
Barbara, please repeat the question a little bit slower. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Sure. So you talked about how you managed to give access to the peace process to victims of the armed conflict. Where would digitalization also be helpful in empowering Indigenous peoples and fight the social and political exclusion you talked about in Colombia?
Listo, pues créame que eso es uno de los retos que tenemos ahorita. Creo que no nos habíamos imaginado que pues, todo el tema del COVID nos iba a poner en esta dinámica, no lo teníamos planteado a corto plazo, pero creo que aquí se entrelazaron varios escenarios que nos permiten, pues me van a permitir ahorita dar una respuesta. Primero que es fundamental fortalecer las estructuras de gobierno propio de los pueblos indígenas y que en el marco de la autonomía se decida cómo se va a disponer de estos elementos tecnológicos pues, que son de uso común para toda la población pues, que pueda tener acceso, uno. Y dos, designar a los responsables de este uso y, digamos, de esta interacción digital. Y aquí pues me centro en el tema de la educación y creo que es uno de los referentes que también nosotros tenemos aquí. Y es que es la primera vez que abogados indígenas litigamos ante un alto tribunal en Colombia. Y de mis compañeros, pues 3 de mis colegas abogados hablan su idioma propio y son formados profesionalmente. Y esto nos permite pues que ellos sean ese puente para interpretar, porque hay una cosa que pues también nos comentaban los mayores que es una cosa es traducir y otra cosa es interpretar. Y todo este tema jurídico traducido a un idioma propio, pues puede generar, la persona pues que no tenga una formación jurídica, pues dar un mensaje pues que no es el que se está planteando en una diligencia judicial. Entonces, el hecho de que se haya cruzado, pues que las autoridades hayan dispuesto los medios para poder conectarnos a través de Internet y que hayan personas capacitadas y que y hablen el idioma propio, es un escenario pues muy, muy prometedor frente a esa iniciativa que tenían nuestros mayores desde hace muchos años. Esto lo veníamos exigiendo desde hace más de 50 años los pueblos indígenas, de que pues de alguna manera respeten nuestras estructuras de gobierno propio y que a través de ellas pues sea que se den estos escenarios de acceso a la justicia pues como lo estamos haciendo ahorita con la Jurisdicción Especial para la Paz. Entonces pues eso les podría como responder de manera preliminar. Estamos construyendo esta interacción y de alguna manera, pues a medida que vamos avanzando, encontramos cosas nuevas, pues que estamos revisando y de alguna manera evaluando para avanzar de una manera más efectiva y pues, garantizando los derechos de las víctimas.
Yes, I think, Aldemar, you are very right. And when the decade for the indigenous languages will start next year, I think this is one of the important issues that you have really to push the authorities of your government to continue, that people, that indigenous people can represent themselves in court in their own language, and that they get also education in their own language. So thank you very much. I would like to ask Barbara, do we have any signs of Andrea being with us? Or are there any more questions? Because I see the time is running. Can you just...
Oh, unfortunately, she didn't connect, so I think we can move on to the final statements.
Okay. Then I would like to ask you also whether we have, for the time being, seen every questions in the chat, or what is the situation there?
Yes, no further questions so far.
Okay, wonderful. So we have a final good 9 minutes for final comments and also recommendations by the indigenous peoples to us Incomindios, to other NGOs, to civil society, but also to their sisters and brothers, indigenous people. And we hope that these recommendations will be heard by the government of India and Colombia. I would like to ask Atina for example, 2-3 minutes only, so that we can have Aldemar also for final recommendations. Thank you, Atina, you're already ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. Yes, as for my concluding remarks, I would like to say that currently under the Digital India, that government of India is really pushing for the digitalization of the whole country. I want to emphasize that they should look into the situation of indigenous peoples as a special case, as a special situations, to ensure that all the gaps that exist, not just in terms of the internet and broadband and Wi-Fi connectivity, but alongside also the other lack of infrastructures, social, economic issues, and also to ensure that the rights of indigenous peoples to their identity as indigenous peoples is recognized, legally recognized, and also their rights to their land, territories, and resources is also at threat. Why? Because of so many development aggression that is taking place. And all this needs to be also considered while trying to also, improve the digital connectivity for indigenous peoples. And now with the Digital India, everything is being digitalized, e-commerce, e-governance, and in terms of this, the difficulties that indigenous people have access to all this is a major concern that government of India should look into. And so that indigenous people will have equal opportunities in terms of their social economic rights, and the right to information, which is an act under the Constitution of India, must also be respected, and indigenous people must have access to this right, to this act as well. And as I mentioned in my previous statement, education is at a critical situation because of the ongoing pandemic situation. So this is something that needs to be geared up to cover educational opportunities equally for indigenous children living in the most remote areas. And this is all I can say for now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Atina. Once again, it has been clearly shown that everything is interconnected. And you are so right. We talk about the rights-based situation, and indigenous peoples have certainly the right to these services and accesses. And you showed that infrastructure, which has to be provided by the government, not by you or by NGOs such as us. We can only support then the working with these infrastructures, but that's certainly the task of the government. And I'm sure that Aldemar will join you in what you said. But let's listen to Aldemar's final statement and maybe also final recommendations to the government, and maybe also to us, who knows if we can do something more. Thank you, Aldemar. You have the floor.
Bueno, quisiera pues, partiendo un poco de la experiencia que hemos tenido con el trabajo de justicia transicional, tener claro que para reducir la brecha digital o de acceso a los medios para poder comunicarse a través de estos medios, es necesario reducir la brecha social y la justicia social que han denominado en algunos espacios. Entonces, creo que hay que empezar por ahí. Actualmente en Colombia, pues aún se sigue discriminando a los pueblos indígenas, siguen asesinando a nuestros compañeros. Creo que el acceso a la educación, como lo dije, es un privilegio para muchos de mis hermanos indígenas a nivel nacional. Y las mismas oportunidades pues no las tienen todos, y de alguna forma pues el tema del conflicto armado aún está presente en los resguardos indígenas donde nosotros estamos trabajando. Creo que es fundamental que se trabaje directamente con las autoridades indígenas, y que la recomendación pues que hago puntualmente al gobierno nacional es respetar la autonomía indígena, y que pues de alguna manera se establezcan diálogos sinceros y con buena fe para la implementación de políticas que puedan reducir la brecha social y en ese orden de ideas reducir esta brecha digital. Creo que ha sido fundamental este tema de la pandemia para poder entender la dimensión de este escenario de comunicación y de relacionamiento con nuestros hermanos indígenas de aquí de Colombia y de otras partes de Sudamérica y del mundo. Inclusive para mí es muy grato estar aquí compartiendo estas cortas palabras con ustedes. Y creo que también hay una recomendación también para la sociedad, no solamente colombiana, sino internacional, y es en el escenario de reconocernos a nosotros y reconocer al otro, porque si no partimos de ese escenario práctico, pues en los estamentos públicos y en las instituciones o en las instituciones del Estado, pues van a estar personas que si no reconocen al otro como un igual, pues nunca van a llegar a un escenario en el cual pues vamos a poder llegar a acuerdos. Vamos a tratar de imponerle una situación al otro, al más vulnerable, al más débil. Y pues nosotros, esa es la situación que no queremos, fomentar el diálogo y ese diálogo que sea constructivo, en razón de que pues, nos respeten a nosotros como pueblos indígenas, nuestra identidad, nuestra cosmovisión, pero de alguna manera como somos ciudadanos de este Estado colombiano, que se nos garanticen los derechos en ese sentido de la igualdad material, pues que se ha hablado pues acá en Colombia. Y pues la invitación a los compañeros de Incomindios y demás organizaciones internacionales, pues a acompañarnos y a hacer seguimiento y a pues, seguir con el diálogo y seguir con el diálogo para poder ir construyendo a medida pues que vamos avanzando. Pues ese sería como mis comentarios finales. Agradecer el espacio y a mi hermana Atina, muchísimas gracias por compartir este escenario con nosotros y esperamos encontrarnos muy pronto.
Thank you very much, Aldemar. You sure said it, that we need to acknowledge each other and we have to start from the very practical point. And it is again the indigenous peoples that are the ones most vulnerable to suffer. And also that it's not enough for what has been done so far by the governments, despite the fact that we would have some tools, as we have explained earlier. And it's good to start with the transitional justice, but we need to close the social gap most of all. And I think this is also true for Atina. We have to close the social gap in all of indigenous people's society, and that they really find themselves where they have their space in society. And if they don't want to participate, as Aldemar told us about some remote indigenous communities that have decided to stay away from our society, then it's their decision. We have to keep up self-determination for all of the indigenous peoples and their communities. So as time has already progressed, I think the only thing that I can do now is that to actually promise both of you and indigenous peoples that we have taken your words for serious. We are going to do the best we can to promote your words and to see that support is given where needed. And we also wish to reach out to other indigenous communities and to the UN institutions for pushing this important issue. Therefore, in the next days, we will upload our side event on our YouTube channel for everyone to see and listen, and we will promote the link on our social media. This takes me to thank everyone involved. First of all, our interpreters, Olivia and Carolina, for their excellent work. And also I would like to thank the Incomindios team for managing so excellently this side event. And in this, I would like to wish you all a very fruitful EMRIP session if you're involved. And we are looking forward to meeting you again. And please stay safe, in particular Atina and Aldemar in your communities. Convey our best wishes to your communities in Colombia and in the Nagaland. And also we wish you a good summer. Be assured Incomindios will continue to support indigenous issues, and we will be back for the UN Human Rights Council meeting in September. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Incomindios, and thank you, Aldemar.
Thank you.